Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Ratterman, and I would like to welcome you to our 7th session in our monthly Lunch and Learn series. Again, Revolution Group will be discussing topics of interest for best practices for your small to medium business. As we have mentioned before, if there is a topic you are personally interested in discussing, please feel free to tweet at rev_group using the hashtag lunchandlearn, and we will take that topic into consideration for future webinars. As many of you are probably aware, we are a premier IT consultant firm serving small to medium businesses in the greater Columbus area for over 20 years. Today's discussion is centered on identity and access management. I am joined again today by our IT architect, Scott Coffman, who will dive deeper into this topic. As always, if there are any questions throughout, please feel free to type them in the browser and we will address them at the conclusion of the presentation. And without further ado, here's Scott.
Thanks, Scott. As you mentioned, the topic is identity and access management, which really is a very broad and vague term for consolidating the number of passwords you have to manage and making security around those passwords easier. The definition of identity management is the concept of having a single source of information for users and then having that one identity managed and linked to other applications. Ideally, when we're talking about this, it's going to be single sign-on. That's really the example that we're referring to. It's what most people think of when we talk about identity management, is really consolidating the number of passwords down to a single authentication source, so you don't have to remember 7 passwords for your email and your Windows account and your Salesforce account and your line of business account. All of those identities can be centrally managed. Access management ties directly in with identity management, and so when you have a single source of information for identity, it makes it a lot easier to control access to those applications. It's a single place to manage the permissions for those users. Single sign-on, why is it so important? Why is it so beneficial to companies? And it's one thing that's been very popular in enterprise space for a number of years. As you can imagine, you get into the larger enterprise companies, they have tens, maybe hundreds of applications. Well, it's always a big push to try to get those applications all tied to the central authentication source. When I mention central authentication source, for most firms, that's Active Directory. That is when you log into your domain, or you log into your computer, that uses Active Directory. And single sign-on, in most cases, uses Active Directory as kind of that single trust, that single place where the users exist. So single sign-on, leveraging that, it makes it easier for your users. They just have to remember their Windows, their domain username and password, and that works for everything else that's linked to the single sign-on. It simplifies the employee onboarding and offboarding. As you can imagine, if you create the user in one place, you've done the work of creating it for all those applications tied into your single sign-on. Today you may create a new user and you have to create their user account in your Salesforce account, maybe your separate email setup system, maybe your separate line of business applications, whatever it may be. You have to create that user in every place. If you have all that tied together to a central authentication source, you create it once and it's flowing to everybody else. And with so, it controls access and security of those systems and platforms. So if you can imagine, when it comes time to let somebody go, or maybe you have somebody leaving, how sure are you that you've disabled access to every single application they had access to? If you have all of that centralized, and you kill that central user, it essentially will not, it blocks out access to all those applications tied in, which is really a big plus for those that have to maintain security compliance. Being able to prove that you've locked everybody out is a very important thing. And then also, it's less calls to the service desk, which allows your employees to be more productive. They don't have to waste time calling our guys to get a password reset because they can't remember the password to this, the password to that. There's just one password they have to remember. It really kind of cuts down on the number of calls having to come in to deal with that. And single sign-on is important for kind of a different reason too, for more of the security aspect. It allows you to take advantage of MultiFactor authentication. Maybe you've heard it called TwoFactor Authentication, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But really what this does is, you may have used this before for your Apple ID, or maybe your Google account, or maybe your Dropbox account. When you log in and it wants to challenge you, the simplest form of that is like challenge questions, but really what we're seeing more of the popular trend is to do like one-time text message verification. So you get a text message your phone that has a code. So some services allow you to enforce that second level of authentication when there's certain circumstances at hand, and I'll explain a little bit more as we proceed in the slides here. An example of single sign-on, probably the most popular form of single sign-on that we see in use in the small and medium business space today is centered around Microsoft's Office 365 cloud platform. And for those of you that don't know what Office 365 is, it really is a suite of products in the cloud that are kind of bundled together. Email, SharePoint, Skype for Business, those types of services, the Office online apps, all of those different kind of suite of products. They are driven by a back-end authentication source called Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And what you can do is link the Microsoft Azure Active Directory to your on-premise Active Directory. So what happens is it trusts your authentication source, your Active Directory that you have in your business, as the point to authenticate those users. So you can sign up and take advantage of all of these Office 365 applications that maybe you already do and have the logins for that. Instead of having a separate Office 365 login, you can have it run through your on-premise Active Directory. So you use your Windows, your domain, username, and password to get access to those. And again, that allows for a synchronization of user accounts, so you don't have to create those accounts in two places. And some other cool things that you can do with the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, not just Office 365, but they give you a platform to extend that to virtually almost any software as a service application. So what they allow you to do is to pick through a gallery of applications that are already compatible with Azure Active Directory and allow you to link, for example, your Salesforce account, your Dropbox account, whatever it may be, your Box.net, link those software as a service applications to Office 365, Azure Active Directory, and have it all still go through your on-premise Active Directory environment. So you control that access. So in kind of an example of how to do that, here's just a quick little list of gallery of applications. You can see there's quite a few DocuSigns that is one we see a lot of people using it with. Citrix ShareFile is a good web sharing platform. All of these are just an example. I think there's a couple thousand different applications in it, and it's really easy to get those added. So most of the major software as a service applications are going to be compatible with this. But an example of how you can go through and create it, you just go through, you pick your application from the list, you join it to your account, and you go and configure the other end to let it know that, hey, it's joined to my Office 365, and it's going to give you the ability to map those users, from Salesforce or whatever it may be, to your Active Directory environment, really allowing you to have a central place to manage that. We talked about multi-factor authentication a little bit before. As I mentioned, it's also known as two-factor authentication. And when they mention two-factor, what that really means is something you have or something you know. So there's the first factor, something you know. In most cases, that's a username and a password. You know what that is. And then the second factor is something you have, whether it's an RSA key fob, maybe it's a smart card, maybe it's your smartphone that you can get a verification key on. That is a second factor. A lot of compliance mechanisms require you to have multi-factor authentication. We deal with some government entities that require this type of access into secure systems to really ensure that people accessing it are who they say they are. A couple more examples. A really primitive example that is really that everybody uses that they probably don't realize is two-factor or multi-factor authentication is when you access an ATM. Something you have is your debit card, and something you know is your PIN. So when you're accessing an ATM, you're using a very kind of a physical form of two-factor authentication. More so used in the computing environments, the cloud environments, is the smartphone, the token fob, or the smart card. Some other examples beyond that is fingerprint recognition, voice recognition, or even handwriting recognition. You're starting to see introduced in some cases where they're really looking to get that extra edge on some of the security. So the multi-factor authentication is important kind of outside of the whole single sign-on, but I mention it in kind of this presentation just because of most identity management single sign-on platforms give you this ability. And what's really neat is being able to tailor that. There's Azure Active Directory has some extra levels of subscriptions if you wanted to get some advanced features, and one of those are based upon geographic location. So imagine you have a rule in place that doesn't allow logins to your software as a service, your all those applications managed by single sign-on, to not allow logins to come from China, to not allow logins to come from or to disable a login when there's a login in the United States and a login in Asia 2 hours later. It's impossible to get from the United States to Asia within 2 hours. So you can set up time-based restraints to disable accounts when it sees suspicious activity. This gives you the ability to do that. It really is kind of a game changer for applying kind of that next level security to your applications. All of these examples are just kind of dealing with what's available through Office 365, but there's other mechanisms available for providing single sign-on. I think Salesforce, they run their own kind of single sign-on platform. If you maybe don't have an Active Directory environment, you can just have everything in your Salesforce account and have it be the broker for those other applications. This is kind of a very unique topic, as it's hard to specialize because every environment's different as far as what applications they use. If you have any specific questions or examples that you want to get into more discussion about, feel free to reach out to me. My phone number is on the screen there. Also reach out to Scott Ratterman or your account manager if you want to initiate any further conversation. We can really look at your environments and see what we can do to help manage that password sprawl for your users and really make it simplified and give you a better secure platform for access to your applications. At this time, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Ratterman.
All right, thanks, Scott. Just looking through, it looks like we have a couple questions from our audience that came up throughout the presentation. The first question was, can I use single sign-on with any application?
Not any application. So really, it's a case-by-case example. It's a two-way street. There has to be the ability for that application to have a hook to work outside of it. So some of the smaller line of business applications, they may not have a mechanism available to trust another source, another authentication source. But most legitimate applications, most applications that have a good development backing have integrated at least Active Directory integration, so you can have that be the login source. So really it is a case-by-case basis. What this presentation really is to get you asking the question, can I do it? And can I call my software vendor and ask them, what do you guys offer for allowing me to have not have to use a separate login for this application? Does it offer Active Directory integration? So really I would recommend to bring that up with your account manager and as a topic to explore.
Okay. Last question we had so far is, do you have to have Office 365 to use single sign-on?
No, as I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, Salesforce also has a platform. There are other third-party providers out there that will offer basically a, they call it PaaS, Platform as a Service. And what you can do is build your identity management solution on top of that. I think Ping Identity is one of them, but there's a number of services that will basically give you Active Directory in the cloud, but it's not really Active Directory. It's their own identity management platform. And just like Office 365 and just like Salesforce, they allow you to pick from a library of applications that are compatible with it and allow that to broker through their central identity source.
Okay. Looks like that's all the questions we had. Again, if anything else should come up, feel free to contact Scott. His information is listed on this final slide. And as we had mentioned before, if there's any topics of interest for further webinars that you would be interested in hearing about, feel free to tweet at us at @rev_group using the hashtag #lunchandlearn. Be on the lookout. We will be sending out some marketing information about next month's webinar. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out. We look forward to being in touch soon. Thank you.